Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and Perception Action Podcast, back with another article review. In this episode, what I want to look at is a study looking at volleyball practice, and particularly practicing the attack in volleyball, comparing different practice designs. So, this is going to be another one that makes a direct comparison between an ecological approach, in particular, kind of using a CLA approach with a more traditional method. I also think, as we'll see, it's a great example of task simplification as opposed to decomposition. So, of that in action. So, this is the study how functional movement variability facilitates successful skill adaptation during the volleyball attack by, among others, Eduardo Ruggiero and Keith Davids. So, this paper is, as I said, is going to compare this method, ecological method with more traditional coaching. So, as way of background, they point out that a growing body of research is showing that learning a skill is a nonlinear process, which involves searching for solutions, right? Being able to solve problems fits perfectly with in the ecological dynamics framework, which moves away from the idea that we want to reach this idea of automaticity through mental representation to more, active problem solving. Um, so they focus on talking about ecological dynamics, the notion of representative task design, the idea that instead of breaking a skill apart, decomposing it, and all those things, we typically see, we want to manipulate task constraints to make affordances, opportunities for action available to learners to explore and find their own performance solutions. Affordances plural. That's a key thing in this paper is going to be practicing with more than one option available to the athlete, more than one affordance, right? So that's kind of what we want to do, they want to look at in the study. Okay, so they're talking about volleyball attacking, the horizontal approach to the net to spike a ball. We can manipulate various constraints: the ball flight time, the angle, the location of the blockers, etc., and so on. If we carefully manipulate, we can see how the skill emerges in the face of these constraints. So there's um, how they're what they're going to do in the present study. As they mentioned, there's a growing despite the support for this approach, CLA, there's only a limited number, although a fair number of studies that have looked at the CLA versus traditional approaches in terms of performance outcomes. So they're going to compare traditional decomposed block practice and training on attacking with a CLA approach and a higher variability approach. Okay. They're also, what the interesting part of this paper, they're going to look at kind of how the variables that explain successful performance, whether you hit it in or not. And they're going to look at how those emerge based on practice. So I think we're getting into a lot of people complain about in the ecological. What's the process? What changes as you use a constraint? So they're starting to get a little bit into that. I think that's a good advance. Okay. So that's the basic questions they want to answer. So what they're going to use, they had male volleyball players. They had 12, so relatively small sample size on the Portuguese international team, randomly assigned to either a traditional group or a CLA group. They practiced for 6 weeks, twice a week. They took three types of three types of blocks, opposition, and angles. Um, the situations are typically in volleyball, they're called line coverage, diagonal coverage, or open block, right? So there are three things, right? So they're shown. Let's see if I have the picture here. Here we go. So they're starting from different positions, coming to the net from angle, farther away. Sometimes there's a blocker there, sometimes they're not. In the traditional approach, right, we practice these in isolation. So we're going to do several repeats of hitting with no blocker there, right? Or several repeats and coming from an angle, kind of block practice, repeat it over and over. What they're going to do, that's the traditional approach group in the study. What they're going to do in the CLA is they're going to interleave these. They're going to randomly pick one of these that you're going to do. So it's kind of random practice, right? As I mentioned at the start, I think this is a great example of task simplification, right? So if we can't, if we want to work on developing the skill of attacking, we can't just play a game and have everything completely open and have every possible option available and alternative possible there. We want to somehow constrain it. We want to somehow make it easier for the learner, right? So I think this is a great example. What they've done, so what they've done is taken 3 different options, right? 3 different possibilities and put them together, right? So a relatively small number, right? You don't need to have everything present in the game there in practice. That's one of the key things we kind of mix up about representative design. We can just have 3 affordances, 3 options, 3 constraints available. The key factor here is the person doesn't know beforehand which is going to be, right? That unpredictability and unknown is so critical, right? They have to pick up information and make the decision on the fly. They don't know what they're doing beforehand. That is the central piece to this. Not how many, you don't need 400 options in practice, but you do need a decision make. You do need them to have to be able to decide what they're doing without knowing beforehand, right? Which is what happens in block practice. You know there's going to be no blocker because you're practicing 20 times with no blocker, right? So that's going to be the comparison, the 2 groups. They're going to measure intervention, after the intervention, a follow-up test. They're going to look at performance in a kind of representative serve reception set sequence. The total of 108 attacks with zone floor blockers, 18 attacks one at a time to avoid fatigue. Right, so they're fairly representative pre and post tests. Okay, as I mentioned, this is a zone 4, right, where they're making their attack. Okay. Just to go over the training again, the traditional training is performed in block practice. They knew the same attack over and over before moving to the next one. They knew what type of attack it was going to be beforehand. And so very traditional. Let's work on this today and let's do it. I get this a lot. We get this a lot in my sport too, baseball. Let's field a ground ball going to your left, right? We do that over and over again. Or let's field a bouncing ball and throw it to first, right? Very predictable. They know what's happening. Part of the reason I recognize is practicality, right? It takes time and more space and options to set up interleave those 3 different options. But so this traditional training where we block something and there's no decision in the person, they know exactly what they're going to do before the play starts. What I'm trying to say is it's still very, very prevalent. At least I see it. The other group practice the same 3 situations, but they're interleaved. They're randomly interleaved. They don't know beforehand where they're going to have to go with the ball, whether it's going to be a blocker. So it's kind of random practice. Um, they're not training in isolation. They're infusing variability and critically decision making. Right? They have to pick up decision information to decide where to go and how to move. Okay, so you don't need a million possibilities. They only have 3 here, but that's showing that. Dependent variables, they measure 2 performance. Successful attacks, so the ball hit over the blocker but hit in. And they also looked at these kind of process variability. They looked at how the variability of movement was reorganized. What measures of execution best related to successful and unsuccessful attacks, right? So they looked at a variety of different things. Basically, they looked at a lot of different kind of kinematic variables. Okay, they looked at the end of the planting step. What was the lateral and the kind of lateral longitudinal deviation, the participant center of mass. Okay, then they looked at the jump. What was the okay? So they're looking at some of these kind of variables, and they tried a lot of them in a multiple regression and looked at these things. Okay. So overall, what did they find? What's the basic rate? Overall, there was more successful attacks after the CLA training, where we have variability. So this is before there's no difference. After you're seeing some difference, they're not significant. At retention, you're getting significantly more successful attacks by the CLA than a traditional group, right? So very consistent finding. Giving people learning under variable conditions where you have to make decisions, things are simplified, not decomposed, you get much better performance. Okay. They also looked at they looked at these process variables. This is showing the lateral variability of their center of mass and longitudinal variability of their center of mass. Okay. And what you can see is it looks like you want high variability in this and lower variable in that is successful attacks, right? So again, not every movement parameter you want variability. You want different degrees. Um, so you can see this is what developed through the practice. You get these different variables that relate to whether they were successful or not. So not going to make too much of that here, but I think it's an interesting start in trying to identify what is changing in practice, what aspect of movement, what's the process, okay? So two variables that predicted successful performance: lateral deviation and center of mass, longitudinal deviation of center of mass, okay, at ball contact, okay, at the end of the planting step, okay? So some interesting variables identified, okay? So overall, they suggest that task manipulation implemented for the CL group provided more representative training context, supporting athletes' exploratory action guided by available information. Ecological approach there, when you don't know what's going to happen, you have to learn to pick up information and couple it to your movement. Okay, task very put unknown, a limit. So critically, again, this is what I meant by the example of a task simplification: unknown but yet limited actions, right? So a good task simplification, giving a small number of actions the athlete doesn't know ahead of time what they're going to have to do. So that kind of addresses a bit the practicality problem I talked about, right? You don't need a full team, a full defense, right, playing against you where the ball could go anywhere. You don't have to practice that way. Okay. So we want these but critically, the unknown unpredictability is so essential, the decision making component. Okay. Um, so again, here's this point again. Important aspect of the task was to limit the number of blocking apps. By doing so, it provides simplification rather than decomposition of the task, maintaining relevant information in the performance context of the participant. Right. So having the affordances there, having this decision-making component is really, really critical, even if the decisions are not that many. Right. So I think it's a really good example, as I said, of using task simplification, keeping the task intact, keeping the whole thing intact, just limiting the number of possibilities. That's another way we can do task simplification. Present studies align with previous research indicating inducing constrained variability in practice designs allows volleyball to explore the system degeneracy, promoting effective goal achievement. You're learning different options. Practicing attack with unknown yet limited number of blocks action resulted in better performance outcomes than separately rehearsing scenarios of block observation known in advance. When they can predict it, that's deadly, right? It's a totally different task when you can predict when you know what you have to do before the play starts. I've talked about this before. Planned movements are completely different than unpredictable movements, right? So we need to practice. That's a key element of representative design. Affordance is present, more than one option. Okay. So I think that's all I wanted to cover today. So thank you very much for joining me. Cheers for now and keep them coupled.